Warm greetings from the Chennai Center for China Studies and welcome to another episode of C3S Conversation. This is Balasubramanian here, Senior Research Officer, in an interview with Ambassador P S Raghavan, Chairman, National Security Advisory Board, on the topic India at the SCO, the 22nd summit which was recently held at Samarkand. To introduce our distinguished guest, Ambassador P S Raghavan is Chairman of the National Security Advisory Board of India. He joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1979 and has held various important and distinguished diplomatic assignments in Russia, Poland, UK, Vietnam, and South Africa. As one of India's most brilliant diplomats, he was Joint Secretary in the Prime Minister's office between 2000 to 2004, dealing with foreign affairs, nuclear energy, space, defense, and national security. He also headed the Development Partnership Administration, Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, and was India's ambassador to Russia, Ireland, and Czech Republic. He holds a degree in physics from St. Stephen's College, Delhi, and in electronics and communications engineering from the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. Sir, thank you so much for joining, and it is an honor and privilege to have you with us. So let me now quickly get into the question, sir. Ambassador, may I begin you by asking you on the significance of the SCO to India, because this is also the fifth anniversary of our membership in the SCO. We also have a principled strategic partnership with the Russian Federation, but at the same time, we also have a strategic partnership based on shared values with the US. And then also there is the China factor. So how does India's membership of the Quad square up with our presence at the SCO, and how are these perceived terminological differences of the Indo-Pacific and Asia-Pacific overcome within the SCO? Do these points gain any significance with India taking over the SCO presidency and that of the G20 later this year, sir?
But first of all, thank you very much for doing this interview with me. Now, the questions that you've asked amount to a virtual thesis, because you've covered a very wide canvas of both in terms of themes and in terms of region. But to start with, why the SCO is of importance to us, the short answer is that the SCO covers a region which is in our immediate neighborhood. And obviously our strategic, economic, security, political considerations dictate that we should be present in this immediate neighborhood in every possible way possible. The SCO started sometime in the late 1990s, actually as a Shanghai 5. It was intended to be a vehicle through which China strengthened its relations with countries with whom it was trying to sort out its border issues, which was basically Russia and three of the Central Asian countries. Then by 2001, it acquired greater ambition. Uzbekistan joined it. It then became the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And from being an organization which was supposed to promote harmonious relations with countries with whom China had a border, it became a kind of a broader organization looking at political, economic, and security cooperation. And in a way, to try to promote an Asian view of the world, a non-West view of the world, to work towards multipolarity. All of this was in that decision to become a formal organization. And as it grew, the idea of bringing in India into that organization actually started very early, even as early as 2003-04, when Russia suggested getting India into the SCO. Local politics, the politics of that organization, and of course, the politics of China-India relations prevented this from happening till quite late. India became an observer of the SCO quite early, but it became a full member only in 2017, and then also on the Chinese condition that Pakistan should also become member of the SCO. So, so SCO then became a much larger organization. Down the line, on the way, the geopolitical situation changed considerably, and therefore some of the original objectives of the SCO of being a united a pole or united, an organization which would unite in seeking a multipolar world, in seeking a a democratization of the political governance of the world and democratization of the economic governance of the world. Or some of all these objectives sort of got diluted in the sense that countries of the SCO had different challenges in the geopolitical scene, and therefore found it difficult to unite under many of these objectives. So that is where we actually were when India and Pakistan joined. Now, why is it important to India? It is important to India because, as I said right in the beginning, it's in our immediate neighborhood. It's if you see, there is only a small slice of land between Pakistan-occupied Kashmir and Central Asia, and that is that slice of land which Afghanistan, where Afghanistan juts into our border, which is what should have been our border if Pakistan had not occupied Kashmir. So it is also a region which is dominated today by Russia and China, and naturally you want to be in a position to monitor their dynamics. And then if you look also at the larger picture, the Eurasian landmass should not be seen to be only including Central Asia. It's a continuum, really. If you go further west, you take Central Asia, you take the Caspian region, you go further on into the Caucasus. All of this is a Eurasian region, and in today's world, all of this developments all across this region can impact on our economic interests, political interests, and security interests. So that is a powerful reason for us to be in the SCO. And today, as you know, in the latest summit, Iran joined it as well. Saudi Arabia is now, in that range of dialogue partners and observer countries, you have an entire range now which extends from Turkey to Saudi Arabia, and then you go further east. In fact, it goes further up to Belarus, because now Belarus is becoming a candidate country for membership of the SCO. And now you also have the Southeast Asian countries. So its spread is increasing, geographical reach is increasing, and therefore the number of countries interacting there make it even more important for us to be part of the SCO. Then you look further up at our bilateral relationships. You mentioned that our bilateral relations with Russia and our bilateral relations with China. You didn't quite mention it in that context, but the point is that if you look at our standoff between India and China, and you, of course, in C3S know this better than anyone else, the standoff is in the Eurasian region. Though we have a lot of initiatives in the Indo-Pacific. I'll come to the Indo-Pacific and the Quad in just a bit. But our standoff with China is actually in the Eurasian region. And our defense against China in this particular aspect is in the Eurasian region. That's important. The Russia relationship is important both for historical reasons, and history has also ensured that we have a very strong defense cooperation with Russia. So we need to make sure that our defense cooperation, even though we're trying to diversify our defense cooperation, you still have a very large proportion of our military acquisitions, and particularly the technology aspects of military acquisition are from Russia. We need to protect that. And as Russia-West relations have gone into free fall, and as US-China relations are also now facing considerable tension, the Russia-China axis is strengthening. Again, you have a very great interest in ensuring that Russian interest in India is sufficiently strong to prevent the Russia-China axis from acting against India's interests. So all of this feed into our presence in the SCO. And lastly, about the SCO itself, Central Asia, and in this SCO Summit, PM particularly made a point, our Prime Minister Narendra Modi made a particularly strong pitch to talk about the centrality of Central Asia in the SCO. So we need to strengthen our relations with Central Asia in such a way as not necessarily to dilute the Russia-China condominium in it, but at least to strengthen our own position there, and to develop independent links with Central Asia, so that they also want to have a certain autonomy of action between these two powers. And if we also build our connectivity through Iran, through the International North-South Transport Corridor, you have a link with Central Asia, which is in mutual interest. So this is again another area where we would like to strengthen, particularly by the time of our next SCO Summit, which India will host. Now you look at the Indo-Pacific region. Now the Indo-Pacific region, again, all of us in the South, I think, know particularly well the maritime history of India. It doesn't get included in our history books in North India, unfortunately. But you see, India's period of great prosperity in the past was built on our maritime links. And the fact that today the northern borders, the land borders in the north, are so difficult to penetrate for political reasons, for geographical reasons, what it means is that 90% of our trade is by the maritime route. Also, we are sitting on a very, very valuable piece of maritime real estate, which is in the crossroads of the East and West, crossroads of commercial traffic, crossroads of military movement. So all of this, the economic aspect, the political aspects, and of course, security aspects in the Indian Ocean, and so make the Indo-Pacific a very important region for us. And what we are doing in the Indo-Pacific right now, and for us, the Indo-Pacific is much more than the eastern part. It also includes the western part. Much of the West considers the Indo-Pacific as just the Eastern Indo-Pacific, Eastern Indian Ocean, and the Pacific. Anyway, but this is a region of very great importance to us. And the Quad and the other Indo-Pacific initiatives that we are doing, including those with Southeast Asia, and other countries in that region, are meant to protect our interests in the Indo-Pacific, to ensure that one country does not have a hegemony over that particular region. And that is where we come into the partnership which we have with the United States and Australia and Japan, of course, in the Quad, and independently also bilaterally with each of these countries. Now, our interests with the United States are totally convergent. The United States' interest in the Pacific as a projection of its power coincides entirely with our objective of trying to make sure that China, in particular, does not strengthen its hegemony or does not exercise a hegemony or create its hegemony in this region. Now, I would say that both our interests, in spite of the fact that the US and Russia are now in a situation of total standoff, I would say that our interests with Russia and the SCO region in the continental space, and our partnership with the US in the Quad and in the Indo-Pacific space, are not contradictory to each other. They are basically complementary to each other. Now, if you go back into the history of the India-US relationship, if you go back to the history of the India-US relationship, when can it be said to have begun to take off? It is in the early 2000s, just after our nuclear tests, in fact. When the US had put us in the dock and introduced all sorts of sanctions against India, shortly thereafter, the US recognized the potential of India in the Asian region as some kind of a bulwark against China, which the US even then recognized as the up-and-coming superpower rival. And therefore, the strategic underpinning of the India-US relationship is really the convergence of interest vis-a-vis China, which is the reason why the US really did all the heavy lifting and pushed through the nuclear deal with India, opened up the civil nuclear cooperation with India, breaking down some of the non-proliferation rules which US itself had helped create. So there was a very strong strategic reason. So the US recognizes the need for a strong India in Asia as part of its overall strategy. Now, a strong India in Asia requires India to look after its Eurasian flank, to protect its Eurasian flank. And that is where, when you talked about the seeming contradiction between what we are doing in the Indo-Pacific and the Quad and what we are doing in Eurasia with the SCO and Russia and China, it may be a seeming contradiction, but in larger strategic terms, it makes the greatest bit of sense. I think I've answered all parts of your question.
Ambassador, thank you so much. Ambassador, quickly moving on to the environment part, let me set it, Ambassador. The just concluded summit of the SCO was also, taking place against a lot of background, because major developments were happening concerning the political, economic, and socio health field. You had the impact of COVID-19, you had the fallout of the war in Ukraine, there were economic and food crisis, the continuing menace of terrorism were some of the major issues which concentrated the minds of many of the participating leaders. With these developments casting a long shadow on the Samarkand summit, how successful was a meeting between leaders of the SCO? So, how does the Samarkand communique reflect these diverse values?
Yeah, that's a good question. I talked about the perspectives that caused India to join the SCO and why we remain in the SCO. However, the contradictions within the SCO are there for all to see. And that is what asks people, including you, asking the question, what are we doing in the SCO? Why are we there in the SCO? Because there are very many contradictions in the positions between countries of the SCO. I've spoken about it, I've written about it, in terms of even the basic ideas. All countries of the SCO are members of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, have acceded to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. India and Pakistan have not. Again, you saw in this communique something that sticks out like a sore thumb in every SCO communique. They tell you about the BRI. So now in BRI, every single SCO country except India subscribes to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. And that is listed there. It is listed there in a very peculiar way in the SCO communique. It says Russia, China, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Pakistan, all of them express their support for the BRI. So thereby leaving just India out. It's a very funny way of... So you have, and then we look at terrorism, for example. The SCO formulation of terrorism is basically the Chinese formulation of terrorism. They talk about terrorism, separatism, extremism. I mean, this is a standard Chinese line. They don't say just terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. They use these three. So essentially, they're bothered about ATM and other such movements, which China sees as a problem to itself. It doesn't really bother about the terrorist elements that India is bothered about, because Pakistan and China will not allow it. There are so many other differences in view. If you see this communique, had something like 150 paragraphs or so, somewhere between 125 and 150 paragraphs. For some reason, they didn't number them, so it's very difficult to know. But at my rough count, it was somewhere between 125 and 150 paragraphs. But if you look at it, how many international developments, how many international trouble spots did that communique mention? Just one, just Afghanistan. It talked about Afghanistan. It talked about the need for an inclusive government in Afghanistan, the need to humanitarian assistance, etc., etc. It did not mention Syria. It did not mention Libya. It did not mention the Ukraine war. It didn't mention any of the major international development. That itself shows, in 150 paragraphs, if you have not mentioned any of the major international issues, it shows what is the level of, what is the lowest common or the highest common factor of the SCO countries. So, and of course, generally they say we have to cooperate in this, we have to cooperate in that, our justice departments, our parliaments, our law enforcement organizations, counter-terrorism. It's a joke, to have a counter-terrorism organization operating with military of India, China, and Pakistan. I mean, right now or very soon, they will be in Manesar with counter-terrorism drills. I mean, it's very peculiar because these are the two countries that we believe are actually acting against India's security interests. So there are a lot of seeming paradoxes in this. So SCO, qua SCO, as an SCO, in terms of the joint stand that SCO can take, I think is exposed by this particular document. But where does it help you? It helps you, as I said, it gives you an opportunity to interact with the Central Asian countries. Also, there was this India-Russia summit. It got Prime Minister Modi got the opportunity to have a summit meeting with President Erdogan. Very useful, very important, because it is Turkey will play a very important role in the Eurasian region, and we have to somehow create some kind of a modus vivendi with Turkey in spite of our apprehensions about Turkey's behavior on the international scene. So it provides us an opportunity to interact with all the players of the region, Iran, of course, as well, I should mention. So that is the importance of the SCO as an organization that provides the umbrella for all these activities, rather than as an organization that articulates the political vision of these countries.
Thank you, Ambassador. You've put it very beautifully. In fact, my next question is also on other countries joining. Ambassador, the SCO, as you mentioned, it was formed in 2001 as a partnership of choice between the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China, with the addition of 3 other Central Asian states. But with the addition of 3 members thereafter, and Iran also now joining at the recent summit to make it 9, and perhaps also with the coming in of Turkey and others, I would say in the not too distant future, would Russia and China see some sort of dilution in their grip in the setting of the SCO agenda? So, if it happens, how do you think this would impact India's membership in the SCO? Because our Prime Minister also remarked on the centrality of the Central Asia in the SCO.
Yeah, for us, the centrality of Central Asia is important because that is the reason why we are in the SCO. Now, if you talk about the expansion of the SCO, firstly, of course, it will take time for it to expand. But what you can depend upon both Russia and China to try to do is for each to bring in countries which it is comfortable with. So that is why you talk about Belarus. Russia is very comfortable with Belarus. It wants Belarus in. China will want some of the countries in Southeast Asia to come in with it feels most confident. So each will try to bring its constituents into that. But the important point about SCO expansion is that it is a consensus decision. So even if they try to do this, India will have, now being in it, will have a veto on who it will bring in and who it will not bring in. So to that extent, you see, our role will also become important. We don't want more inimical elements coming into that region and coming into, because eventually Central Asian centrality is a matter of geography. It is there. And whatever else, it is central. So you bring more people from the east, you bring more people from the west, Central Asia will still remain central to SCO. And it is central to our interest. So we will try to see that, this expansion. And as I said, the SCO as a common vehicle for its members' political views does not exist anymore. And that can only get even more diluted. You bring more members in, the political visions will get even more diluted. Given the flux in the world today, see, even Russia and China have now differences, and more differences will come up as each try to protect their own interests in the global geopolitical flux. So there will be differences even between them which will crop up. One will be stronger, one will be weaker, and depending on how one perceives itself, the strength that one perceives vis-a-vis the other, its own positioning will change. So SCO as an organization will undergo all these challenges. We have to focus on what we want in it. We want this regional focus. We want to be present in this region. We want to make sure that we get this connectivity through Iran and thereby increase the influence of this region in the SCO. And that we should continue to work for.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now I would like to a little bit draw your attention towards the Prime Minister's statement, where in his statement, the Prime Minister had noted that the SCO must make efforts to develop reliable, resilient, and diversified supply chains in a region requiring better connectivity, as well as grant of full right to transit to members. So we do have significant hurdles in this regard from Pakistan and maybe even from China. So would our active participation in the INSTC, the International North-South Transport Corridor, and our involvement in the Chabahar allow us to mitigate the negative effect of the denial of transit rights?
Yeah, well, I think there are 3 points that the Prime Minister was simultaneously trying to make in that particular statement. One is, of course, as you rightly say, the Pakistan-Afghanistan link, the direct transit route, which has been close to us. He also wanted to, as you say, promote the INSTC, which is the alternative connection to that. And along with that, we are already members of various transit arrangements that the Central Asians have. The Ashgabat Agreement, the Tir Convention also, which we have joined, enables us to have seamless transportation. Once you reach the Central Asian borders, you are able to. So that definitely helps the supply chain, improve the supply chain resilience, because there is a lot of important raw materials which we can actually access in Central Asia, provided we have the economically viable method of accessing them. And the third point that you were making was BRI, because BRI effectively is a vehicle of China, for China, by China. So it's basically a route which, an infrastructure building route which serves only China. Whereas if you really look at INSTC is a far more open transit corridor. It's a transit corridor which is actually available to all of Southeast Asia, South Asia, and West Asia into the Eurasian landmass, which is economically viable, open to all. So he's also making that distinction between the exclusivity of the BRI and the inclusivity of INSTC, which I think India has not really put this out in a stronger way in the public domain. I mean, the world has not really fully recognized this.
Thank you, Ambassador, for bringing this point out between INSTC and BRI, and bringing the inclusive and the exclusive aspects of both the projects. Now, I would like to speak about the security concerns. As we know, the SCO members expressed their deep concern over the security threat posed by terrorism, separatism, and extremism. But however, as you mentioned in the previous responses, two of the SCO members seem to be oblivious to this very thought by deliberately ignoring India's sustained campaign in the fight against the global menace of terrorism. How do you think we can overcome this conundrum, which does reflect on the non-seriousness of some of the members on the fight against terrorism? And of course, as you rightly mentioned, Ambassador, India would be hosting the Regional Anti-Terror Structure, which is a RATS meeting, and the UNSC meetings on terrorism shortly.
Yeah. Actually, when you join any multilateral organization, you are very clear-eyed about what you can get out of it and what you cannot get out of it. When you see the composition of the SCO, you know that you cannot get what you want out of it on terrorism. And you went there with your eyes open. Just as you cannot get the SCO to suddenly express its support for India's permanent membership of the UN Security Council. So there are aspects of India's core ambitions which you cannot expect the SCO to endorse. You knew that when we went in. So you should not try to do things with it which you cannot do. Now, what we have on terrorism, our campaign against terrorism, and what we want to get on terrorism, we should pursue elsewhere. We should pursue in our other international engagements. We should pursue in the United Nations. We should pursue along with our partners in the West. These are the constituencies in which we should push our concerns about terrorism, where they also share it. So in the SCO, we will continue to do what we can do within the SCO, which is connectivity, and terrorism to a limited extent, in the sense that, we do have one common concern about terrorism from Afghanistan not flowing out in all directions. And that broad concern is there, in spite of the fact that the Chinese want to only consider ATM as as a terrorist organization, and the Pakistanis will not let the others be done. But to the extent that Afghanistan should have an inclusive society and thereby reduce its temptation to promote terrorist forces, there are these commonalities that are there. And within the SCO, in spite of Pakistan and China behaving as they do, when we build our Central Asian linkages, we are stressing that. We did have, immediately after the Taliban took over in Afghanistan, all 5 Central Asian national security advisors were in Delhi, along with the Russian national security advisor, to talk about the problems of terrorism and instability, basically, coming out of Afghanistan. So that will remain. In December this year, we are going to have another meeting of the Central Asian NSAs with our NSA in India to talk about that. So we can also promote within the SCO, not as SCO initiative, but within the SCO, with countries of the SCO, we are also promoting some of our interests vis-a-vis terrorism. We can do that, but that's what all we can do. We cannot expect tomorrow the SCO to change its spots suddenly and to do what you want it to do. But you know that all along. I think that's how we need to play our cards in the SCO.
Ambassador, now I would like to little bit speak about the India-Russia relations, because our Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is meeting with President Putin, also reinforced the strength of India-Russia relations. The West has also made much noise of the Prime Minister's remark of the era of war. However, the response of Russian leader also saw a kind of understanding. So going forward, how do you see India-Russia relations developing with the various churning processes going on in the global geostrategic environment, Ambassador?
Yeah. India-Russia relations have a long history. And that history has been shaped, the relations have been shaped by both history and geography. The geography part of it, I mentioned even before as part of the SCO. You have Russia and China dominating the landmass immediately to our north, very important for our security. So if you look at, in a way, if you want to look at a negative reason for India-Russia relations, the negative reason is that you do not want Russia and China to form a hostile axis against you in Central Asia, which can actually hurt your security interests. So that is one importance of, that is the geographical, when the geopolitics is at least 50% geography. So that is an important aspect. Now you come to the positive aspects, as I keep explaining to my European friends all over the place, we do not have the same history with Russia that they have. They have a very complex history. Part of Europe was dominated by Russia. Part of Europe was actually occupied by the Soviet Union. They've had also the history of rivalry. They have the history of military conflict. We don't have any of that with Russia. Our history with Russia has been quite the reverse. Because of our geography and because of the geopolitics of the Cold War, the Russians have actually helped us. So we need to keep that in mind. And because of that also, we have this defense cooperation. Now, defense cooperation is very deep. And it has grown over the years. And it is defense cooperation, and I keep saying this all the time, you cannot change your defense supplier like you change your soap or your shampoo. It's a very complex process. You have a series of technological basis for your equipment, and many of the very advanced military technologies that we have are Russian. And therefore, you cannot, at the same time, we have been diversifying our defense acquisition over the last 2 decades. Not just now because the West told us to wean ourselves away from Russia. We've been doing this from the year 2000. And if you look at the CPRI arms transfer register, you see that there is a progressive diminishing of the proportion of our military acquisitions from Russia, increasing proportion of our military acquisitions from the US, from Israel, from France. But still today, the last March 2022 CPRI report said that 46% of our acquisitions over the previous 5 years were from Russia. You can't wish away that. So that is something that it's a progress that is taking place. It is a decision that we took regardless of the present Russia-US fallout. We've taken the decision not to put all our eggs in one basket, and we're doing this. But it happens at its own pace. Meanwhile, we see no reason to completely tear ourselves away from Russia to our detriment, to increase our military vulnerability. So all of this is reflected in the way we have been dealing with Russia. I'm not saying that, we've made it very clear we do not support the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We clearly accept that it is a violation of territorial integrity and sovereignty. But no purpose is served in completely severing your relations with Russia over that. Because we have other interests in our region, and I come back to the Eurasian region where we have our security interests, where we need Russia, and so on. Now, if you look at what the PM told Putin, actually everybody focused on that one sentence which said, this is not the era of war, this is the era of peace. But he said 5 other things along with that. He reminded Putin that he has a personal relationship with him going back to the year 2001, when he was Gujarat chief minister, when he went and signed an agreement in Russia. He talked about President Putin's contribution to India-Russia relations personally. So, personally, President Putin's contribution to India-Russia relations. He said that we will be talking about cooperation in fertilizer, in 3 or 4 areas. and defense and many more. So he said a lot of things, and he said that India-Russia relations are very, very strong. So, people have picked what they want to pick, and that's all right. I mean, I don't think we should object to it. Let them do that. If they want to declare success and say that, thereby they've got India to criticize Russia. Well, also, if you go back, after I saw that, I went through the various statements that Prime Minister Modi himself has made on Ukraine, starting from February, and in various contexts. Standing next to German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in May, he said that, this is a war that cannot be won, that there will be no victors in this war. There is no alternative to dialogue and diplomacy. And therefore, we want this war to start. He said that in Germany. When talking to President Biden in April, at the beginning of the 2+2 dialogue, he said the same thing. He said that we have been constantly asking for diplomacy and dialogue. And as far as human rights violations go, we condemn human rights violations everywhere, and we would like an impartial inquiry. That is what our foreign minister said in the UN Security Council speech, of which much was made. Prime Minister Modi had said this already. So, actually, everything that the foreign minister said, the only one addition that the foreign minister made in the UN Security Council was on the nuclear issue. That is because of this new controversy that came up. And obviously, we will always say that we are concerned about the nuclear issue. So, going back to this, therefore, President Putin also understands the pressures on India. He understands India's position, as he himself said that I understand your concerns and I will discuss with you. So, it was a far more balanced position articulated by Prime Minister Modi and articulated by our foreign minister at the UN Security Council than the public has deliberately chosen to portray it as. So it's all right. I mean, if they want to portray it as suddenly India having flipped against Russia, fine, let them do so. It doesn't really concern India-Russia relations. India-Russia relations are governed by what the two leaders say to each other.
Ambassador, now I would like to little bit take you to the India-China equation part. There was some mention of the possibility of a Modi-Xi meeting following in what our external affairs minister saw as the removal of one point from the difficulties in India-China relations. Here I specifically mentioned to the PP-15 disengagement. Expectedly, the meeting did not take place. Ambassador, from your experience, both as a diplomat and as someone who had accompanied a former prime minister to various meetings, would there have the possibility of some exchange of pleasantries and even more between the two leaders behind those? And where does this leave India-China relations? Because President Xi did mention China's support and cooperation to India's presidency of the SCO.
Yeah, to take the last point first, that China expressed support for India's presidency of the SCO. These are formalities and niceties that all leaders will maintain regardless of bilateral relations between countries. You have even in the SCO communique, they expressed appreciation of India's handling of the SCO, the RATS, of which India was the chair this year. So, that kind of niceties and that kind of formalities countries in multilateral organizations maintain regardless of bilateral relations. So, we should put that aside. Secondly, quite often, when you have a multilateral meeting of this kind, it does give opportunity for leaders, even when they have a very difficult relations between their countries, to express some niceties and to say a few things, maybe in the corridor, walking down towards the same meeting and so on. It does happen. I do not know the reality because I was not there, but it somehow, from all the visuals that we have seen, it would appear that such things did not take place in Samarkand between the Indian and the Chinese leaders. You saw that even there was only one group photograph that where the two were there, and there was no smile and no connection between the two. And some of the other occasions where the leaders were together, conveniently neither President Xi nor Prime Minister Modi were present there. and therefore there was no way of gauging any body language. So it would appear that the two leaders had not actually taken the opportunity to meet each other. I think it was on the Indian side, of course, it has been, I think, consistently maintained that our Prime Minister will not meet President Xi because they felt that not enough had been done to repair the damage of the April-May 2020 standoff. And that as the foreign minister, external affairs minister, keeps saying, the state of the relationship will depend on the state of the border. So the state of the border, in India's judgment, has not reached the stage where you can have a dialogue with China. Quite clearly, that is the meaning of the absence of a meeting in Samarkand. Well, they have another opportunity. They have an opportunity in November when the G20 takes place. Is it November or October? I think it's October or November when the G20 meeting takes place. They will have another opportunity, and let us see if there is some progress in the relations from either side. In between, there will also be a meeting an important meeting for President Xi in China, the Congress of the CC Communist Party of China, CPC, or is it CCP, Chinese Communist Party, CCP, and we'll see how that impacts on the way China behaves. But similarly, we did not have a meeting with Pakistan, which was also anticipated, expected, but nothing seemed to have happened.
Thank you, Ambassador. Before we conclude, my last question will be on, speaking of Russia-China relations, there has been some dent in the no limits partnership. Do you think there has been some dent in the no limits partnership? Would Beijing be setting those limits? How can India ensure its interests are preserved in this competing and conflicting interests, especially in the matrix of Sino-Russia ties?
This no limits partnership is a wonderful creation. It's a creation of those who want to see it that way in order to justify many actions of theirs. I don't think that Russia-China relations are very, very close. They're very strategic. There are very important reasons why they should be so. But they have never been no limits, and they can never be no limits. Because there are very deep strategic, and you in the C3S would know this better than I. There are strategic fault lines which may have been papered over and which will be papered over when there are overwhelming reasons to do so. But they will again exhibit themselves when the occasion comes and when each side finds it possible to do so. Now, even as far as this no limits partnership goes, this quotation is from the communique or the joint statement that was issued when President Putin went to China in February, just before he invaded Ukraine. And that is why it became a very nice way to justify the fact that, Russia and China are close together. But if you look at their communique, at their joint statement, which was done in June, I think, of 2021, when their 20-year strategic partnership document was renewed, they also said, they said something very much similar. They didn't use this expression, but they said that, ours is a new type of international relations. It is not like that of the Cold War, but it goes above and beyond that, very close. And they used a lot of flowery language, which is just about the same as saying it is a no limits friendship. So that, you see, that they do whenever there is either there is a Russia-China, wherever there is a US-Russia tension rises, they go back and say this. Wherever US-China tension rises, they go back and tell each other what good friends they are. So this is part of a reaction. And one should not take these public statements at face value so much. But as you know, there are many, many fault lines. I mean, even in now, China has been very careful about the kind of endorsement of Russia's invasion of Ukraine that Russia may have wanted. It has not endorsed Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What it has said was it has criticized NATO. It has criticized NATO, and then it conveniently criticized the United States for its Indo-Pacific initiatives and so on, which where Russia and China have common ground. But the fact it has also tried to take advantage of Russia-Ukraine differences by, in fact, strengthening military cooperation with Ukraine, not during the conflict, but before the conflict. It tried to buy up, as you might know, that the very major turbine manufacturer of Ukraine, which the Americans stepped in and stopped the purchase. So even in the BRI, I mean, there are differences in the BRI. The Russians are not very keen on China establishing direct contact with each of the Central Asian countries, expanding its not only economic footprint, but now its political and security footprint in Central Asia. The Russians have tried to tell the Chinese to do the BRI through the Eurasian Economic Union, which the China has sort of said yes to, but has ignored completely. Also, so many of the the routes for BRI projects bypass Russia, actually. And they reach all the way to Europe bypassing Russia. So there are many such fault lines, and the way in which China treats Russia. Also, there is a lot of Russian writing on the subject of frictions. China is careful at the top level to treat Russia as an equal, but at other levels, Chinese officials don't treat Russian officials as equal, and this rankles. So it's a stage when Russia is clearly on the back foot, when they have to take what China is doing. If that situation changes even a little bit, you will see its manifestation. So there is a potential rift there. Right now, to talk about a rift is very premature, but there is a potential for a rift. And that is what people like the West, but also India. It is in India's interest to create and widen that rift to the extent that it is possible for us, and that should be part of our strategic goals as well. And of course, as you know, there's that whole million square kilometers of territory that used to be Chinese, which is now with Russia. And if China takes that away, China will become a more comprehensive superpower, because in addition to everything else, it will become a hydrocarbon superpower and get the access to the Arctic, which it craves for and cannot get today. So that is also a kind of a friction between Russia and China, potential friction between Russia and China. So we need to take this into account rather than take these formulaic description of Russia-China relations.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. It is a privilege and honor, to have you with us and making this interview. Let me now propose this brief vote of thanks. Sir, as we come to the end, to the conclusion of this interview, I express my sincere thanks and gratitude to you for taking time out to be with us and patiently taking all the questions, sir. I also offer my sincere thanks to Commodore R.S. Vasan, Indian Navy retired, Director General, Chennai Center for China Studies, and Ambassador M. Ganapathy, former Secretary Best and Distinguished Member, Chennai Center for China Studies, for their unwavering support as always. Jai Hind. Thank you so much, Ambassador.